Hi guys, it's Beth from bourboncreekcrafts here today. I hope you all are doing well. Today I am revisiting collection number 3 from the June 2020 Flavor of the Month kit, and this is the Pond Life collection. And I'm down to scraps, so I am just trying to figure out the best way to use up the scraps that I have left. So here I'm trying to figure out, I had thought I wanted to put these particular pieces on a brown card base and decided I didn't like it as much as I thought. So these are some pieces, they were pretty much the size I needed them to be. I did trim down the polka dot just a tad and set it off to the left of my card base there just to offset it a little bit. And then I'm adding these other two pieces layering on there. And these were just scraps. I went with the sizes that I had, was just trying to figure out the best and quickest and most fun way to use the scraps that I had. So I'm adhering these down, and then I'm also going to use one of the sentiments from this stamp set, and I'm going to go with the one that says "You're totally awesome." I love that sentiment, and I've used that on a lot of my cards so far with this kit. So I'm just punch that out with I think it was a 1-inch circle punch, and decided I wanted to back it with something. So I pulled out a small piece of brown scrap that I had and did a, like 1 1/4 or 1 1/8 inch scallop punch there. So just thought it needed a little bit more something behind it than just the white. So here I kind of fiddled with where I wanted it. I had originally thought I wanted it towards the top, but I decided I liked it better at the bottom. And then I wanted to add some sequins or enamel dots or something kind of scattered around the top and the bottom, but I really wanted brown. And the enamel dots in this collection were a peach, and none of the sequins were that brown color. So I just went to some more of that brown cardstock and pulled out a scrap and just punched some tiny little circles and just gluing those down as enamel dots. I do this a lot. Just trying to use up the scraps that I have, and I don't know, it's kind of a nice, cost-efficient way to get the enamel dot look. So here is my finished card for the first one. So for the second one, I'm going to use a sketch from the sketch sheet, and it's the Operation Right Home sketch number 55. And I'm going to just kind of piece these together, and I had decided the patterns and the scraps that I had wanted to use, and I think I originally had them in a different layout because after I cut this peach polka dot piece down, I realized I was thinking I was going to put it on the bottom, but then after I cut it down, I realized that I wanted to use the lily pad flowers there at the bottom because of the orientation of the flowers. So of course I had already cut that peach polka dot piece a little too short. So I decided that that's fine because now I can actually leave a little bit of white space in between each of the pieces, and that will help break up some of the pattern a little bit. So, it's one of those things that it ends up working out better in the end. So now I'm just kind of trimming down the pieces, trying to figure out the size that I need them to make them fit with the white space showing in between all of the different pieces and around the edge. So once I get that figured out, I go ahead and start to adhere it. And one nice thing that I found about ATG is that as long as you don't press it down, you can still move things around quite a bit. And when I'm doing cards like these where I'm piecing scraps together, I'm always moving the scraps around. So you can see here that I realized that Argyle kind of style pattern was not in the right spot, so I needed to shift it a little bit. So it came up pretty easily, and I did add some extra ATG just to make sure it's going to stay stuck. So I think I finally have everything in the right place now. And I'm going to use that sailboat pattern as kind of my focal point on the card. The sketch calls for more of a horizontal rectangle, but I'm going for a vertical because that's the scraps I had, and sometimes that's what you need to do. And so I decided that in order to help it stand out, I'm going to back it on some white cardstock as well to kind of keep with that white border that I have going on. And then I just have a sailboat and sentiment. It's another sentiment from that stamp set that says, "I hope you are doing well." And I had already stamped that when I was kind of stamping some extra stuff for the blog hop that we did last weekend. So I really want to use those yellow flowers, and I'm trying to figure out if it's going to be too much, because I also want to use the enamel dots. So I decided to go ahead and put my sentiment down, and I know for sure that I want to use those peach enamel dots because I really love those. So I'm going to pick the medium size and just add them to the top left corner there of my rectangle element. And then I decide I do want to use the flowers, but maybe 3 was a bit too much. So I end up going with 2. And this is after I fiddle with those enamel dots for a while. So I figure 2 is good, especially since I have 3 enamel dots. That keeps me with an odd number of embellishments. So I like how that turned out. And that is my second card. So for my third card, I am going to pull out a sketch from my stash, and it is My Favorite Things, number 330. And I have this bigger piece of striped paper that I want to use, so I'm just trimming it down to fit onto that turquoise card base there. And then I have that almost like a small honeycomb pattern. And so I decide, since I have 2 really busy patterns going on, I'm going to separate it with some white cardstock to help break that up. And then I have this frog that I had already stamped on some white cardstock, and so I decided to go ahead and use him. And I am coloring him. Really basic coloring since he's kind of small. And I don't have a whole lot of shades of greens in my Copic markers, but the shade I used was YG03. It's kind of the lighter yellow green. And so I'm just kind of doing a basic coloring on him. But I do come back and add extra shading to certain parts because I did want his belly to be a little bit lighter than the rest of him. Just because when you look at a frog's belly, it always seems to be more white on the white side. So that's really the only, I guess, technique that I did with this frog. Otherwise, I kept it pretty simple. So after I have him colored, I punched him out with a circle punch. And then I decided again that he needed something behind him. So pulled out some turquoise cardstock. And this is from my stash because I had already cut all the cardstock in the kit down to card bases. So the sketch calls for a little strip down at the bottom there, and I didn't want to do another pattern since there was so much going on, so I decided to go back to that turquoise cardstock. And then I'm pulling out a sentiment, and I decided to go with the Be Full of Life sentiment from the stamp set. And I really wanted to stamp it on the turquoise cardstock strip at the bottom. However, there is a slight texture to this cardstock, and I had just re-inked my ink pad finally, because in the last video it was like totally dry. And for some reason it kept wanting to smear on this cardstock. So I was like, fine. Cut a new strip of the turquoise and then decided to go ahead and stamp it on just a scrap of white. And that worked much better. So I trimmed that down. And then I'm going to start kind of adhering everything together. So one way to help break up, if you have a bunch of busy patterns going on, you can use them together, but it helps to break them up with like a solid color cardstock. So the white helps separate the 2 busy patterns, and then the fact that I use, more of a solid color for some of the other elements helped as well. I used to be afraid to use busy patterns, but sometimes I realize it's just more fun with those patterns. You just have to to add a little separation there. So I'm using the scraps that I had originally tried to stamp onto with that turquoise cardstock, and I'm going to piece a couple little strips together and add them behind the top part of my frog. And that's just so that he lays flat, since he's kind of hanging off that strip going across the middle there. And now I can't figure out where I want to put my sentiment. I really wanted it at the bottom, but I didn't like it, so I decided to go ahead and add it to the left-hand side of the card and then just did a fishtail on one end. And then I realized the card needs something at the top to help break up all that pattern. So I do bring in that turquoise cardstock again for a little fishtail at the top, and decide that even with the fishtail, it needs something else. And I had exactly 3 of the enamel dots left. So I looked at the sequins, didn't necessarily like the color combinations with this paper, and so decided to go ahead and use up the last of those enamel dots. And then I feel like it's a little more balanced. And so that is card number 3. So at this point, I'm evaluating the scraps I have left and think I can make one more card. So I'm using a card sketch that I know from memory, because I use it just about at this point, like in about every pad that I use up. And it's Operation Right Home, sketch number 154. I even have it memorized, and I will include a link in the description box to this sketch and the other sketch that I used that was not part of the sketch sheet. And again, I don't always have the sketch in front of me because it's one I use all the time, so I kind of know it and all the sizes from memory. And so basically, you just cut down your squares to your pattern paper to 1.5 inch squares, and then you have a 3.5 inch kind of frame piece that goes behind it, and a strip at the bottom. Super easy, and I love the sketch. I use it all the time. It's just great for using like those wider strips that you have left. So I only had enough pattern paper to make 3 of the squares, but I had some of that green cardstock left. So I decided to stamp the frog, and I originally thought about doing it on white and decided to go directly onto the green cardstock, and had to stamp it twice because the first time didn't come out very clean. Luckily, there's 2 sides. So I'm going back to the "You Are Totally Awesome" sentiment that I love so much from the stamp set, and using that same 1-inch circle punch again. So now it's just a matter of putting everything onto that 3.5 inch square of white cardstock that I'm using. And again, I like the ATG for this because as long as I don't press them down, it doesn't like grab permanent hold right away. So this is another one of those where I tend to move the pieces around until I get them in the exact right spot that I want them. So I thought about using the wet glue, the Nuvo here, and realized that it might, well, Nuvo might not, but like art glitter glue would stick, would hold before I was ready for it to. So now I'm going to trim that strip down at the bottom to be the 4 1/4 width of my card. And then decide to add some foam tape to the back of my sentiment there. And then that will be the end of this card. So at this point, I want to use up the scraps that I have left to put on the inside of the cards. So I'm adding some white cardstock to the inside of all of the dark card bases that I used, and then am using some of the strips and smaller pieces just to add a little decoration on the inside of the card. This is a great way to use up those last little scraps that you have left over at the very end. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and got some more ideas on how to use up the last bits of your collections. Be sure to check out the description box below for the links to the products I used, the sketches I used, and you can also find more information about the Flavor of the Month subscriptions down there as well. So let me know in the comments below if you guys use up all those last little scraps as well, or if you are just fine getting rid of them. I am a scrap hoarder and tend to save every little bit, hate throwing them away, so I do try and use what I can on the inside of the cards. Sometimes I'll even add them to the outside of the envelopes just to use them up. So I have one last card here that I need to add the inside to, and then I am done. So I ended up getting 7 cards from this collection, and this is what I have left. Those little bitty scraps, the yellow flowers, the stamp set, and then the sequins were actually part of the banana split. But here are the 4 cards that I made today. And then here are the 3 other cards that I also made during the original blog hop. So 7 cards from this collection. Thank you guys so much for your time today, and I hope you're all having a crafty day.